On today's episode of the Confessions of a Recovering Landlord podcast, we're going to pan back and take a global view. Normally, we hone in on Texas, specifically North Texas, but today we're going to have a global conversation. I'd like to welcome my co-host, Bob Gibbons.
Here I am. Sorry, I'm jumping in a little too soon, but we need to talk about a few things in world events. Back after this.
Something I saw recently that really caught my attention was a headline saying major brokerages are pulling out of Russia amid horrific Ukraine invasion. We've been hearing about this, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Shell, BP, but these are our brothers and comrades here. I just found this really interesting.
Well, yeah, I did too, because, a lot of times we come on the show and we talk about those comrades in the business, and we kind of talk about how we don't like the fact that they have all these conflicts of interest. But today, I kind of feel like we need to give them some props because, we're talking about the war in Russia or Ukraine. It's not in Russia. It's, because of Russia in Ukraine. And so let's talk about sort of what's happening here. And we'll get to the brokerage specifically here in a few minutes. But it's amazing what all is happening in the world today right now, and the fallout from that. I mean, obviously, I went and filled up my car with gas last night.
And I had filled mine up with gas that morning.
And you paid
$3.59.
And I only paid $3.61, which wasn't bad. But the interesting part was we were filling up at Costco, so we had a good price. But when we drove past one of the other gas stations, it had gone from, what did you say?
$3.89.
And it was at $4.09 later that same day, 20 cents a gallon in a day.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, I mean, obviously the big first thing is that we're seeing the oil prices have been going up considerably.
Yeah. I was listening to a webinar from Moody's Analytics today, and they were talking about the price of oil and where they think it'll be depending on how long the engagement goes. And, just so many crystal ball features you have to factor in to know. There's no way to know. I mean, this is basically Europe's largest ground war since World War II. So, I mean, this is huge.
So do you remember what they specifically showed for the price of oil?
What was interesting to me was they were factoring it down, talking about crude versus oil versus refined, this kind of thing, and how much the price of a barrel will show up in your gas tank. So if prices are like hovering around 125 right now, and if they go to 150 a barrel, they were saying, okay, that's $5 a gallon for you to fill up your gas tank, that to get it in numbers that we understand. They think that if it's a limited engagement, meaning it's over with this year, that oil will probably fluctuate between $75 and $100 a barrel, and it'll kind of settle between there somewhere. If it continues to go on, it'll be more up toward the $1.50 a barrel.
Well, I'm looking at the West Texas Intermediate, and of course, there's a lot of different kinds of oil, which a lot of people don't really realize. But you have the Brent, which is the stuff from the North Sea near the UK. But West Texas Intermediate is $110.43 a barrel currently. And that's actually down $13 so far today. So it's so that means it was at $123 earlier today. So very close to the 125 you were just talking about. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to see that. And I think the impact of this is, just further inflation, because this is one of the most immediate places that consumers feel inflation. And it's going to have a ripple effect into all kinds of products. And, trying to get on an airplane, you name it, it's going to have an impact.
Yeah, the one that really caught my attention, since I'm such a baker, is the price of wheat has gone up considerably because 25% of the world's supply for wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia.
Ooh,
I didn't know that.
We're all going to have to be gluten-free.
Well, no, it's still, you're still eating a flour product. It's just had the gluten removed.
Oh, so I thought a lot of those.
If you're using like rice flour or something, yes,
okay.
But I believe you can use a wheat product and have the gluten removed. But anyway, it still caught my attention because I do cheat from time to time.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I find this whole thing about the war being so frustrating because there's just no good reason for it that I can find. I mean, even if you're Russian, everything is just manufactured. The whole argument for this thing just is fabricated in the mind of, a crazy man leading the country of Russia. And I
Well,
just
I'd
don't
like to
understand it.
I'd like to call you out on that when you said even if you're Russian, the Russians aren't for this. I think it's
No.
a small handful of people pushing it because Putin has now instituted a law that you can stay up to 15 years in prison for protesting the war. And they're showing the gendarmes, as my mom used to call them, gathering up people, put them in the paddy wagon and taking them off to prison because they're voicing their feelings.
I mean,
It's not allowed.
it just goes back to reiterating something I've always thought, which is if your ideas are not compelling enough on their own to sway people to that point of view, and you have to use force to get people to go along with it.
Yeah, it's a bad idea.
It's just a bad idea from the beginning. It's just the stupidest thing. And I just pray that the people of Russia come around to realizing how bad this is and that social media will come along to help with that. However, one of the big fallouts of this, and this is starting to get into the, not the brokerages that we led off with, but the real estate industry in particular, though, is the U.S. data center impact of all this. And a lot of the U.S. based companies that have big data centers and are in charge of internet service providers, that kind of thing, are pulling out of Russia. And there's a cloud provider in Russia by the name of Yandex, Yandex. And they announced that they are nearly insolvent after being delisted by the Nasdaq. So the stock exchange here in the US has delisted them. And so they're having a real problem, even though they had $600 million in cash held outside of Russia. They said that that suspension by the Nasdaq could trigger a condition on certain of their bonds that allows the holders of those bonds to immediately redeem them with interest. So they won't be able to make that sort of cash call, if you will, as a result. But the other, some of the other people that were mentioned in that article was US-based Cogent Communications is a big co-location, and they're going to drop all their Russian customers. Microsoft is threatening to do that. They don't have a lot of those data centers per se, but they have partnerships. They have this what's called the Azure Cloud Services, and they're talking about breaking up their partnerships over there. Oracle is pulling out. It's just the impact of this is interesting to me because I wonder how much of this is going to interrupt internet service in Russia and isolate the country from the rest of the world more than they already are.
What was interesting to me is, and I tweeted it on my account earlier in the week, you know how Russia had basically cut off Ukraine and all their outside resources, and Elon Musk came along and said, "Oh yeah, hold my beer."
I love that. That was so cool.
I did too. That was such kudos to him because it's the cancel culture of a nation.
Oh, that's cool. I hadn't even thought about it in those terms.
That's what I keep thinking. It's shaming because everyone gets shamed for something they say or do. And this time I'm all for it. Normally I'm like, don't do that. Let's calm down.
Free
in this
speech.
case, right. In this case, it's like, let's cut him off at the knees.
But where does free speech end? At the end of my nose.
You're right.
As long as you're just words, that's one thing.
Well, no, if it's Putin, it goes straight to his face. I'm not stopping at the nose. But that's just my free speech. But something I did want to point out in the major brokerages pulling out of Russia is they're not leaving their facilities empty-handed. They're still going to manage facilities and do the rudimentary things that have to be done to get along. It's the marketing and listing and leasing services and all that they're pulling out of, but managing facilities and providing other essential services for existing multinational clients will continue to go on. It will be at a reduced pace. It'll be a small presence they'll leave there. Well, but cutting ties with it, I just think is huge.
But I think even that, what you just described, varies from one to another. So
True.
Knight Frank and Savills are two large companies that have already said they're ceasing operations. CBRE now is the latest one. CBRE is the biggest commercial real estate services company in the world. And they now said they're going to discontinue most of their Russian operations. And as you pointed out, they have certain obligations there to maintain things. So they're going to keep doing that, but mostly it's going to be a small presence. And I thought it was interesting, and props to Knight Frank and Savills, because they were the first major Western brokerages to cut ties with Russia. And Knight Frank has been there for 20 years. In fact, it's not just brokerages, but even owners like Heinz in Houston, Heinz Interests. I remember I was in Atlanta in the early 90s, I think it was, at a class for a professional designation. And I met a guy who was in the class with me that worked for Heinz, and he was managing a mixed use development in Moscow.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow, you came all the way to Atlanta for a class from Moscow? He's like, well, yeah, I get a certain amount of time off each year. And so I combine my time off with this class, and I'm in the US anyway. So, and I asked him about the kind of property that he was handling. And he said, it's a mixed use development, but it's mainly office space, but there was some apartments, some retail. And I was like, all right, who are your customers? I mean, are you accepting rubles? And he's like, no. All of our tenants are Western companies paying us in US dollars. And so this was, well, I said early 90s. So what is that? Early, 30 years ago. And
well, it's after the wall fell and they started to privatize a lot of the former lands of the Soviet Union.
Well, Heinz has now announced they're pulling out, or at least they're not going to institute any new assets. I don't know that they can just walk away from what they have, but what's also interesting is this article that we were referring to is from a company called BizNow, and they contacted all the big brokerage houses to see who was staying and who wasn't. And it was interesting. Cushman & Wakefield did not respond, and BNP Paribas Real Estate did not respond either. And that doesn't mean they're not going to pull out, but they just haven't responded. So hopefully they will follow suit as well.
I think a lot of this though is kind of crowdfunding shame, because BP had pulled out and Exxon Mobile had pulled out, and then Shell earlier this week. I think BP and Exxon Mobile had pulled out last week. They were like, we're sorry for that purchase we made on Friday. All the profits from it will go to humanitarian efforts, and we will not buy from Russia anymore. So it's kind of like, oh, they're being a do-gooder. I got to be a do-gooder. So
right.
I mean, look at the tech firms such as Apple and Dell. They have both suspended sales in Russia, and logistics and shipping companies, including UPS, FedEx, and Maersk, did I say that right, are pulling out of the country.
Maersk.
So how are they going to get their Amazon products?
Well, and to get it really down to what's really, really critical, TJ Maxx and Marshalls are diverting its stake in Familia.
And IKEA.
Which has 400 locations in Russia. That's amazing.
Yeah, but to top that, McDonald's has 850 restaurants, and they're closing all of them. And you think about, I can't get a Big Mac now, but what about those people that work there?
Yeah, unemployment.
So I'm hoping they go march up to Putin and say, okay, you're going to have to pay me now.
Well, you know what, though? Putin just announced today that he has, because there's terrible inflation in Russia right now as a result of all this. I mean,
you know what it's worth, right? A ruble?
What? A ruble?
Ruble.
Ruble is one of our clients. Ruble is a currency.
A ruble is now worth 1 penny USD.
Really? Well, and I think the last I heard, their interest rates were 20%. But as a result of all that, Putin announced today that pensioners and retirees are going to get, extra money now as a result of all this. So hopefully I'm glad to hear that for those people. And really, that's the whole thing here, is that I feel bad for the Russian people, because as you pointed out, they don't want this.
He's gutting his own country just to have a power play. This isn't going to serve him in any capacity.
He's a very small man who's trying to appear like he's a giant god, because he's got an inferiority complex, which
It would appear.
sounds very similar to somebody else I can think of.
We're
but
not going there.
Moving
Moving
mention
along.
names. All right. Well, I just think overall, I don't think we've seen the last of it. I mean, Avis and Young is already evaluating whether or not they should stay or leave. There's all kinds of other companies that are represented over there that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of. And if every Western company pulls out, it's going to be devastating to Russia in so many different ways. And yet, the thing about Biden having announced that we're not going to be importing any Russian oil anymore, that's 600,000 barrels a day we were importing from Russia. Well, Europe is importing 2 million barrels a day.
Well, that's why they didn't participate in it. We're the only one that.
Well, it's a third of their total energy, and
yeah.
I mean, it would grind their economies to a crawl if they did.
Well, and it's still really winter over there, so I don't know that they really have a choice there. Again, energy independence is what we want.
Well, all the more reason this really pisses me off that Putin did this at all, but much less doing it during winter.
Yeah,
the cruelest time when you have children and old people and people in hospitals trying to evacuate. I mean, what a jerk.
Yeah, that's one term.
Well, it's a family
it's a clean
show.
Podcast. We'll leave it there. But
I didn't check the explicit box.
I wonder how this is going to affect people globally, though. We were just starting to come out of the supply chain crisis that was caused by COVID, and now this. And I got to think this is going to affect the supply chain all over again, and bottleneck and.
Yeah, it will. Well, that's all I have to say about this.
Yeah.
How about you?
That I'm sorry for the people that are cold and starving, and that's awful. And if I don't get my packages from Jeff on time, that's awful too.
Bring it home.
All politics are local. And I saw a picture. It just gets to your heart. And I can't remember the country. I wish I could. I want to say Poland, because I know they're taking a huge hit in refugees coming there. But there was a train station, and along the edge of the little concrete barrier where you exit the train
platform.
Thank you. Were all these baby buggies lined up in a row that mothers of Poland had left there, so mothers of Ukraine could use when they landed. I was like,
now I heard that.
Who thinks of that?
When I saw that picture the first time, it was attributed to people in Berlin, Germany.
Okay.
And then I heard it. Well, then I saw it in Poland as well. So I don't really know if it was either, which it was or both. But either way, it's a cool story. Yeah.
Sometimes it's the opposite of shaming, where everyone's pulling out and we're not going to deal with you. And other people like, oh, you did that. Well, I'll do this. I mean.
And in the battle of ideas, which one of those is going to win?
Exactly. Well, we'd like to thank you for listening to another episode of the Confessions of a Recovering Landlord podcast, brought to you by
Riata Commercial Realty.
Our friends that always represent you and never the big bad landlord.
Our friends that are us.
There's more than just you and me.
Quick shout out to my buddy Steve Eisenstadt in Detroit with Friedman. He told me this week he's been listening and is enjoying the show. So thank you, Steven.
So that was the one extra hit I saw on our analytics.
Now there's 2.
McDonald's coupon coming your way, Steve.
Yeah, in rubles.
Okay, we better cut it off. We shouldn't record in the afternoon. Sorry, folks. We're a little punchy. Please review us. Pardon?
I was just going to do the same thing you were about to do.
You go right ahead.
TexasTenantRep.com, and we'd love to help you out or tell your friends.
Bye.